Hello, everyone out there. My name is Dr. Chris Batai, and welcome to the second installment of the Global Net Zero Steel Project, global facility level pathways to net zero emission steel under several trade and geopolitical climate club scenarios. I will first review our research questions and the method we use to address them. How broad does a group of ambitious climate club countries have to be to transform the global steel sector? How strong does the Climate Club's policy need to be? What is the effect of background policy and expectations outside the sector? And given the reaction we've seen to EU ETS border carbon adjustment mechanism, the US Inflation Reduction Act, and general industrial policy and broad protectionism, what are the implications for trade, and specifically trade in green iron? To answer these questions, we developed and ran several scenarios using a purpose-built, geospatially detailed demand, supply, policy, and trade model, including econometric assessment of demand by GDP per capita, a review of decarbonization technologies in the steel sector, reassessment of scrap supply by country, characterization of the existing steel production fleet at the facility level and time to renovation, existing and evolving technologies, dynamic capacity, and finally, tangibles and intangibles, structuring existing trade relationships. First, to start with the demand for steel, based on the observed need for steel at different stages of development, mainly for transport, energy, and sanitary infrastructure and buildings, we did an econometric analysis of observed historical demand at varying levels of GDP per capita. This was then applied individually for all countries through time. This led to this picture of history and forecast steel demand by major region. You see the increase in steel demand from the early 2000s through to 2020, and it eventually stabilizing out at about 2.2 gigatons in 2030, with a stabilization occurring because while steel demand is dropping in China, it is increasing in other parts of the world, specifically India and Africa and other parts of Asia, with most of the OECD being roughly stable, mainly for replacement of existing steel needs. Now, to briefly review for those who are not familiar, I will review how steel is made both by the primary and secondary routes. First, about 70% of steel was made using fresh iron in 2020, where fresh iron was combined with metallurgical coal inside a blast furnace, and then the liquid iron is sent on to what's called a converter or basic oxygen furnace, which sets the correct level of carbon. This pig iron is then moved on to the refining stand where it's combined with necessary alloys to make whatever grade of steel it's required, and then it is cast and pressed into the various shapes and forms that are needed, the longs and flats, with longs being generally structural steel and flats being things like flat steel for making cars or pipes. Now, the second route is the secondary route where we use scrap iron, and about 25% of steel was made this way in the early 2020s. Scrap is brought in, it's sorted, as much copper is removed, copper and other contaminants are removed as possible. It's then melted in an electric arc furnace, and the liquid steel is then moved up on to the refining stand where the correct proportions of different metals are set for whatever grade of steel that is required. You'll notice that 70 and 25 add to 95. 5% of steel demand is met with what's called a direct reduced iron furnace. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. Now, a key thing to note is that 85% of steel greenhouse gases come from the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace route, where coal is brought in as the reductant and heat source, and the coal is oxidized to CO2, which is released to atmosphere. The secondary route is the primary source of emissions is from the electricity for the electric arc furnace. And if we can assume there is policy to decarbonize the electricity supply and to replace all the heating with electricity, this route can be largely decarbonized with only a few residual emissions. And I do encourage you to download and read our report for details. Now, starting with the Global Energy Monitors Steel Database, the global steel fleet was geospatially mapped out by location, size, type, and age, creating a baseline emissions picture for the simulation to start. We have a mapping of the age and spacing of facilities in the world out through time, start in 2021, with the reds representing blast furnace basic oxygen furnaces, the yellows representing electric arc furnaces, and the grays or dark greens representing syngas DRI furnaces. You'll notice that most of the world's steel production capacity is in China, just over 50%, spread across the country. And the rest of Asia holds most of the other proportion, with just about 130 megatons in India and fast growing. Lots of production in South Korea and Japan, and there has been since the 50s and 60s. And then we also see a lot of steel production in the Middle East and other parts of Asia. European Union is still a strong legacy steelmaker, and there's quite a in the old CIS or residual countries of the Soviet Union. There's still quite a bit of steelmaking capacity, with the Americas in the tail end representing just under 10% of total production. You'll see how this maps out globally in the bottom left here. The reds represent basic blast furnace, basic oxygen furnaces, the yellow electric arc furnaces, the grays syngas DRI and the grays syngas DRI furnaces. You'll notice in North America, it's mainly electric arc furnaces now, with only a few primary facilities left. So roughly 70% of U.S. steel is made with scrap, and 30% with the primary route. We now provide an estimate of steel scrap availability for steel production out to 2050. We're in the high 400s today. It's estimated that this could rise as high as 1.4 gigatons by 2050. And why is this? Steel becomes available, scrap becomes available for use as countries pass through industrialization. There's a huge first wave of steel demand for building bridges, buildings, infrastructure, what have you. This slows down after a while, and then you're basically got replacement of vehicles and other smaller things. China produced a lot of steel through the early parts of the 2000s. This is going on into buildings, infrastructure, what have you. And it's estimated a lot of this could come out and be available for scrap for production as we head out through 2050. It's one of the biggest increases in sources, with most other regions seeing this as well. Now, remember, this is the maximum amount of scrap that's available, that's considered to be available from the literature. Not all of this will be used. We now provide the following bolded options for decarbonizing primary iron ore reduction and steel making. First, up to 26% reductions through design for material efficiency by 2050 are incorporated in our demand. More recycling. As we noted earlier, there's more scrap going to be available, but it depends on the supply of scrap and a network to gather it. An interesting thing happening in the US is there's a lot of combination of scrap and primary iron. And it's been quite regular to make 50% scrap, secondary and primary steel. And this, in some companies, are going as high as 80, even 90%. We do not have blast furnaces with carbon capture included in the analysis, simply because not enough progress has been made with these to bring them into the steel fleet by the late 2020s. This is unfortunate because they can use poorer quality ores, but they simply have not been commercialized. This could change, however. There are other promising coal-based technologies, advanced smelting with CCS, where oxygen is injected. There's no coking. It produces relatively pure CO2, which is easier to do CCS on. But unfortunately, this technology seems to have gone somewhat dormant. Which brings us to the DRI technologies on the right. 5% of the global steel fleet runs off DRI, based mainly off gas, but there are some coal facilities. The gas or coal is turned into a syngas of hydrogen and carbon monoxide. The monoxide provides the reaction heat. The hydrogen takes away most of the oxygen as water. And you get a halving emissions intensity going from the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace route to DRI EAF. It is unfortunately designed for better quality ores, and there are less of these available. They're more expensive. There is a means to use blast furnace pellets in direct reduced iron furnaces, where the reduction reaction happens. Sponge iron comes out the bottom. It then goes to an electric melter, which then lime is added. That lime removes the silicates, and it's slagged off, and then it goes off to a basic oxygen furnace. And ThyssenKrupp is hoping to use that technology. Key thing here is that the hydrogen component, the syngas of hydrogen and carbon monoxide, is replaceable with 100% hydrogen, which can be made either from methane or from electricity. And most investment has gone into the green hydrogen DRI route, specifically mainly in Europe, but now there are some facilities have been announced in the US. This technology has been moving very fast. The only thing holding it back really is the availability of clean electricity to make hydrogen and the availability of adequate ores. Now, I'm going to describe the scenarios that we explored. We did hundreds of different runs, and they've been distilled into the 4 scenarios here. Our baseline scenario, which is just a continuation of today, narrow club, broad club, and broad club fossil fuel ban. And I'm going to talk through these in terms of their climate club membership, the shadow carbon price schedule, or strength of policy. It doesn't have to be a carbon price. It could be various regulations, tradable standards, what have you, tariffs that are applied, and then subsidies. So starting with baseline, there's no climate club, there's no carbon price, there's no trade tariff except the existing ones that are applied in 2021, no climate tariffs, and no subsidies other than the existing subsidies that are applied. Narrow club has the EU and the EEA, the European grouping, the North American trading partners, the US, Canada, and Mexico, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand grouped together. They apply effectively a carbon price of $100 to $300 per ton to their steel fleets. The rest of the world watching this applies something like $30 to $100 per ton. The key thing is the Climate Club members apply a border carbon adjustment, both between each other and to the rest of the world, and a strict 30% border carbon tariff going from the Climate Club to the rest. So any steel that tries to enter the system has to pay a border tariff plus a border carbon adjustment. Within the Climate Club, we also have a subsidy on green iron reduction technologies of $100 per ton to represent subsidies to drive process innovation. Broad Club has obviously a broader membership. It now adds the ASEAN country free trade area in Asia. And we also have the green iron majors added. So we've got Brazil, South Africa, Guinea, Ukraine, Venezuela, and India. The richer Climate Club members over $20,000 per capita, again, impose $100 to $300 per ton. CO2e, the Climate Club members, $30 to $100, and the rest of the world, so under $20,000 per capita, $30 to $100, and the rest of the world, $30 to $100. But again, we've got the border carbon adjustment mechanism operating for the club and the 30% border tariff. Finally, we have broad club fossil fuel ban, where within the club we move to $500 per ton. We've basically banning blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace that don't have 90% capture or capture on syngas DRI plants, while the rest of the world carries on with $30 to $100 per ton. This figure gives you a graphic depiction of the membership of the Climate Club. The dark green is the narrow club scenario, whereas the lighter green adds the broad club. So you see the green iron majors plus ASEAN plus India. Now this shows the emissions impacts of these scenarios. In baseline, we actually see a reduction of 40% in emissions today. And this is mainly because of a natural move to secondary steelmaking through time. Narrow Club sees a 75% reduction, so it's fairly significant, but not total. Broad Club in the bottom left gets an 85% reduction. We still have some residual emissions, whereas Broad Club fossil fuel ban gets us down to sort of the 300 to 400 tons residual emissions level, or 92% reduction. And that's mainly because of blast furnaces, basic oxygen furnaces that were built outside the club in the rest of the world at those lower implicit carbon price levels or regulatory levels in through the 2020s and 2030s. This figure shows you how the technological fleet evolves through time. Top left is baseline. We get blast furnace, basic oxygen furnaces falling to 41% of the fleet. Secondary scrap production rising to 59%. Narrow club, we've got secondary going to again 59%. Blast furnaces are down to 15%. Syngas DRI is 6%, whereas the green hydrogen DRI electric arc furnaces are now taking 17% of the fleet, and notably 2% of the fleet is provided by what we call the EAF primary. It's where DRI units make reduced iron as sponge irons, compressed into hot briquetted iron, put on a boat, and it travels across the world to an electric arc furnace where it's made into steel there. So countries can keep their steel industries, but not necessarily have the iron ore reduction pathway there. This pathway becomes very important once we get to Broad Club. That 2% has now risen to 10% of the global fleet. In early years, much of it is in Europe and some parts of Asia. But in later years, as you'll see in a moment, a lot of it is going to India. Again, the green hydrogen DRI electric arc furnace technology is 18%. Syngas DRI is 4%, total 6%. The blast furnaces are down to 9.25%, and the recycled steel is 58%. And finally, in Broad Club fossil fuel ban, we're down to 5% blast furnaces, a mixture of gas DRI units, just short of 20% DRI, hydrogen DRI electric arc furnaces, and just short of 12% of the global steel production is where HBI is created in one place in the world, put on a boat or a train, and then sent somewhere else. I'll show you how the changes in the cumulative greenhouse gases and steel and CO2 dollars per ton. Decarbonizing steel is not cheap, and global carbon prices are unlikely to reach the requisite level. We're going to need specific policy for the steel sector. A generalized carbon price globally is simply probably not going to decarbonize the sector because of the high carbon prices that are required. We're likely going to need lead markets paying a premium, initially $224 to $403 per ton for a first of a kind plant with $312 mean. That adds about $7,500 to $100 on all tons. But this soon pays off through accelerated technological development and falling cost per ton. If you look at the second diagram here, figure 4, you see an initial jump in price of about $100, $75 to $100 a ton, average across the entire fleet. But this soon comes down in both the Broad Club cases down to cost parity by 2050. So the DRI technologies are hitting cost parity with unabated blast furnace basic oxygen furnaces by the 2050s if this entire policy is applied. In terms of cumulative greenhouse gas emissions, we get 60 gigatons out to 2050. We have to remember they keep on emitting then under baseline. Narrow Club has about 49 cumulative tons at a cost of $356 CO2e per ton. Broad Club, $185 CO2e per ton. And Broad Club fossil fuel ban is 231. And the higher price is because of that initial forcing to green iron ore reduction within the Climate Club. So Broad Club provides almost the same cost per ton as the fossil fuel ban, but at a significantly lower cost. This slide provides changes in energy use. You'll see that coal use falls to just over 80%, gas stays roughly stable, and electricity use increases 4.2 to 5.2 times in Broad Club and Broad Club fossil fuel ban. A key thing to note here is some regions may be able to sustain these increases in electricity production, specifically clean electricity production, but many cannot. And these will be the regions that will likely import HBI for processing into steel in local electric arc furnaces. Most of the electricity is involved with making hydrogen to create the reduction gas in a direct reduced iron furnace. Because of this, we see a global shift in production and demand. From 2021 through 2050, there's a shift in production away from Northeast Asia towards other global regions, partly because of demand, partly because of the capacity to do clean steel, including Southeast Asia, India, Africa, and North and South America. There's a large-scale reduction in the dominance of coal blast furnace basic oxygen furnaces, shown in black. A large increase in recycling, the electric arc furnace scrap pathway, shown in yellow. And large increase in green steel technologies, shown by bright green and the darker green, EF primary. Green iron majors are critical to this transition: Brazil, Australia, Canada, South Africa, Ukraine, India, US, Guinea, and Venezuela. This what we included is based on reserves that we could find in the literature, and they added up to just short of 300 megatons. Two things could happen. We could see more reserves discovered and brought into play, or we could see beneficiation or upgrading of poor quality ores, or we could see breakthroughs in using older, poorer quality ores, such as the goethite in Western Australia, and creating a DRI grade pellet out of it. And many of the iron mining processing companies are working on this today. So in Broad Club, transported green iron rises to 200 megatons per year, and Broad Club fossil fuel ban, it rises to 255. The model is very sensitive to available resources, and if more ore can be raised to DRI grade, it will be used. There's a strongly changing pattern of imports and exports through time, and you see the divergence here across all the major steel producing and demanding regions. Chinese exports surge for 2 decades, then balance. Countries with cheap gas and good iron ore temporarily surge in exports using syngas DRI and syngas DRI with CCS. Developing countries, especially India, have a hard time adding enough clean steel and import quite a bit for a couple of decades until they can balance out. There's a lot of detail in these figures, and I'd be very happy to do targeted presentations for given organizations that are interested in the individual country import and export balances. And please do contact me at the contacts that will be provided at the end of this presentation. Now for the policy upshots. Demand is set to surge across India and Africa. Climate clubs must include India to work, or some aggregation similar to the demand represented by India. Maximizing material efficiency in high-value secondary is key, but requires building code, design, and recyclability policies, as well as well-functioning collection and sorting networks. Generally agreed rules for allowing border carbon adjustment and carbon standards for iron and steel intensity are needed to enable current and future clean production and trade. This is absolutely critical prerequisite for any sort of global system of trade in green iron to work. Net zero requires clear communication to policy and steelmakers that no more unabated blast furnace basic oxygen furnaces without 90% capture CCS can be built past 2025 in developed regions and 2030 elsewhere. And quite simply, very little progress has been made with that. So we need to make progress with other technologies or have a much faster push on innovation. Decarbonization of iron ore reduction plants in the late 2020s requires a fast global innovation process to commercialize near and long-term clean iron reduction technologies. Lead markets, especially for the first round of low GHG intensity iron ore reduction projects, are necessary to establish demand and investment certainty, traded or not. This can be initially established through government-preferred and subsidized procurement, contracts for difference, or production tax credits, but must soon become internally funded. for example, through a sector trading mechanism for clean iron credits. And please do see the report for some of these recommendations. Now for the final key messages of the presentation. Chinese capacity to make blast furnace basic oxygen furnace primary steel already exceeds its demand and could grow to 200 to 300 megatons per year. Closing the dirtiest excess capacity with the worst local air quality implications is absolutely key. We need transformative, not marginal change, or we will stop at minus 50% gas DRI and with huge carbon dioxide removal requirements as a result. The next few years are critical to turning the global steel industry towards net zero CO2 by mid-century. Projects take at least 5 years to permit, to analyze, to finance, and finally to build. Anything built after 2030 will be running in the 2050s. Clean electricity requirements could increase 4.2 to 5.2 times in the broad club and broad club fossil fuel ban scenarios, which may stress some countries' capacities to deliver. This is where trade in hot briquetted iron could be absolutely critical for allowing some countries to carry on making their own steel. Trade in low GHG intensity green hot briquetted iron from multiple suppliers offers flexibility, security, and a means to transfer electricity and hydrogen use where it is cheapest and cleanest. Iron and steel trade is highly volatile and complex. A given relationship may look like a no-brainer, for example, sending green iron to Europe, but it has to be seen in context of global demand, available supply, existing capacity, and relationships and infrastructure and tarification. But the key thing is almost any amount of low GHG iron and hot briquetted iron will be used, even if we're not sure where, and the more we can monetize it, the more there will be. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. The full report is available at netzeroindustry.org for download. And please do send questions to cbatai@gmail.com, cb3794@columbia.edu, or DM me at batai_Chris. And thank you very much for your attention.